GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
All the latest headlines and news. Well, coming up, I'm Arlene Foster. Obviously, you know that. But coming up this hour, this week marked the 40th anniversary of the Birmingham Pub bombings, where 21 people lost their lives and 182 people were injured. I'll be joined by Julie Hamilton, who lost her sister in that horrific attack. The Royal College of Nursing has voted to strike for the very first time. They've announced 2 days when they'll walk out of work in December. Plus, more travel chaos as the RMT announced a fresh round of strikes across December and January, which is set to bring further disruption. So give me your political briefing this afternoon. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Well, first, here's the news with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom, and we start with a developing story. Police investigating the discovery of a body have cordoned off a street in Wigan following concerns it could be covered in hazardous substances. They say the scene is contained and it's believed there's no risk to the surrounding area. Anyone who's had direct contact with the body is being urged to speak to police or seek medical advice immediately, and we'll have more on that story as we get it. The Health Secretary is refusing to back down over nurses' pay demands ahead of their first national strike in over a century. Staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will walk out for 2 days on the 15th and 20th of December. The Royal College of Nursing accused the government of rejecting formal talks as an alternative to industrial action. But Steve Barclay says he can't agree to what he's described as a massive 17.6% pay rise. Instead, he's open to discussing, he says, how working lives can be improved.
A number of areas where we can work together, and my door is open to talk with them. But I think the ask in terms of 17.6% on pay, around 3 times what many viewers are themselves getting in the private sector, is not, within the economic conditions we face, affordable at this time.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government is abdicating its responsibility in resolving the issue.
Nurses have been driven to this by the government, and that's a badge of shame for the government. They've never taken strike action before, and for patients this is going to be devastating news. Nurses don't want to go on strike.
A former soldier has been convicted of killing a man more than 30 years ago at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland. 53-year-old David Jonathan Holden was found guilty of the manslaughter of Aidan McAnespie in County Tyrone in 1988. He admitted firing the shot that killed Mr McAnespie, but claimed it was an accident. Paul Young is national spokesman for the Northern Ireland Veterans Movement. He says they'll appeal the verdict.
Veterans, I can say, will be deeply disappointed by this verdict. I'm saddened by it, but it's not over for David yet, because his team are, as far as I'm aware, are going to appeal the decision, and I think eventually, if necessary, go to the Supreme Court.
A woman with Down syndrome has lost a legal battle in the Court of Appeal. Heidi Crowther had challenged legislation which allows the abortion of babies with the condition up until birth. In England, Wales and Scotland, there's a 24-week limit for terminations, but that can be extended if there's substantial risk the child could be born with physical or mental abnormalities. The Foreign Secretary has announced a package of hands-on support to help Ukraine through the winter. The country is still experiencing power blackouts after Russian airstrikes hit key infrastructure. During his first official trip to Kyiv, James Cleverly pledged to send 35 more emergency vehicles as well as a further £3 million to help rebuild the country. He says it's important the UK shows its continued support.
Ultimately, I think it's incredibly important that the UK demonstrates to the Ukrainian people, who are bearing the brunt of this brutality from Russia, that we are standing shoulder to shoulder with them through our military support, through our humanitarian support, through our economic support, but also through the visible support.
And Wales have lost their World Cup tie against Iran, leaving them bottom of Group B with a game to play. 2-0 the final score. Both goals conceded late in stoppage time after Wales were reduced to 10 men. Keeper Wayne Hennessy was sent off with just 5 minutes remaining. Former football manager Harry Redknapp told GB News Iran's win was well-deserved.
I must be truthful. I wanted Wales to win desperately. I was really cheering Wales on, but Iran were much the better team throughout the game. It wasn't just the 2 goals and the sending off. They'd hit the woodwork on a couple of occasions and really looked a very good team today, Iran. I mean, it just makes England's result look even better when we battered them the other day, you know. But, yeah, in fairness, Wales didn't play well today. They were thoroughly well beaten, and Iran deserved the win.
And yes, tonight it's England's turn against the USA. They're chasing 3 points to secure a place in the knockout stages, and best of luck to Gareth Southgate's men. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to the briefing with Arlene.
Welcome to the briefing at this new earlier time of 2 p.m. Well, this week marks the 40th anniversary of the Birmingham Pub bombings by the IRA. On the 21st of November 1974, 2 bombs were set off at the Mulberry Bush and the Tavern in the town pubs. A third device fortunately failed to detonate. It was the second deadliest act of terrorism in England since the Second World War. 21 people were tragically killed and nearly 200 were injured. 6 people were falsely convicted and the perpetrators are yet to be brought to justice. I'm really, really pleased to say today that joining me in the studio is Julie Hambleton, who lost her sister Maxine in the attack and is a campaigner for justice for the 21. Thank you so much for coming in, Julie, today. It's important to mark this week again because it was on Monday of this week that it was the 40th anniversary. Tell us how you spent that day.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me onto the show, Arlene. Well, on Monday, we always have 2 memorials. The first is at St Philip's Cathedral, which is our spiritual home. But then we have a second memorial at our brand new trees that has been put together with the huge work and thanks to the Birmingham Irish Association, where Maurice Malone, the CEO, and Network Rail have helped us to have a more permanent structure. And the 3 trees that was created by the artistic director to symbolise the three colours, the tricolour of the Irish flag. And the trees have the branches of the names of each of our loved ones on it. And this year we were so fortunate to unveil this fantastic new lighting system that has been funded by donations from the Irish community, the Irish Regeneration Fund, Reconciliation Fund, Network Rail, and also the Birmingham Irish Association, without whom none of this would be possible.
Well, I think that's very interesting, Julie, because a lot of people will say, hold on a second, these were Irish terrorists who came over and killed your lovely sister and 20 other people, injured so many other people. But yet you have found reconciliation with the Irish community in Birmingham. I think that's very important.
It is it's hugely significant for us. When my brother and I first started campaigning over 11 years ago, one of the things we always wanted to do was to work towards rebuilding that fantastic community that Birmingham had prior to the bombings, because the Irish community were castigated vociferously.
Yeah.
And we wanted to try and in some way to rebuild that tight community that was there prior to the bombings, and this process is helping to rebuild that community, and that is with huge thanks to Professor Gavin Schaefer, Rick Sinclair, Maureen Slattery-Marsh, and the incredible Maurice Malone, who's the CEO of the Birmingham Irish Association, and not forgetting the excellent work of the chaps from Network Rail. But what we must not forget is that 6 men were convicted of a crime they didn't commit, and then when they were released in 1991, the West Midlands Police did nothing. I mean, how did the authorities get this so wrong? And ever since, we've been fighting to try and get truth and justice and accountability for our loved ones. And now we are faced with this government's rancid idea of trying to push through the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy Reconciliation Bill, which, under another guise, is an amnesty bill.
Yes, so that legislation is in the House of Lords at the moment. It's going into committee stage. It's already been in the House of Commons. And the idea behind it, I mean, there's various different parts of it, including reconciliation, but you're showing how to do reconciliation in a real meaningful way on the ground, victims working to rebuild with a community which, as you rightly say, was castigated at the time of that terrible event.
Yes, but Baroness O'Lone,
yes,
in the debate on Wednesday evening, she highlighted, which I thought was most interesting, that reconciliation in the bill is mentioned, I think she said it was 187 times. But as for 187, 186 of reconciliation is only in the heading. Right. There's only one section of the bill that actually mentions reconciliation in any slight detail. And Lord Eames, I thought, made a most powerful point. And he said that this bill is basically, quote, putting a horse, and dare I say, hearse, through justice. And that is exactly what this bill is doing. There is no victim's family, and most soldiers that I am aware of are opposed to this. You know, the soldiers say that if there is a case to be brought against them, then they are happy to go to court to face the prosecution, because there is no honour in amnesty.
Yeah.
And there is no honour in this Conservative government trying to railroad this obscene piece of legislation through into the law books that will allow murderers like the cowards who came to our city, killed with impunity and then ran away, which is what they did. They planned, they prepped, and they planted bombs in two packed pubs, because in 1974 people would get paid every week or every fortnight, and they'd get paid on a Thursday. And the provisional IRA always claimed that no one was meant to get killed. Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, who do they think they're kidding? And that's what they're trying to do, is they're trying to rewrite history of their past. But this goes much broader than that, because that is exactly what this bill is doing. Because the Conservative government are trying to bury their own dirty, dark past of their own collusion. I mean, I hope Baroness O'Lone doesn't mind me quoting her, but she did say, referring to the Omar bombing, we need never forget that the people who killed the innocents on the 15th of October 1998 were the Provisional IRA. We can say the same about our loved ones and about thousands of others. And what really... it makes us so angry. My mum, who will be watching, she had to identify Maxine.
Yes. She was only 18.
She was only 18 on a cold, hard slab amongst all these other bodies. And we didn't know that. She only told us that recently in the past few years. And when she told us, I didn't sleep for a week knowing that my mum's last image of her daughter was that. Now, we have other parents, we have other wives, we have sons and daughters who had to ID their fathers. The two of the youngest was Neil Tommy Marsh and Paul Anthony Davis. They were both from the West Indies. Tommy was only 16 and Paul Anthony Davis was only 17. They were only walking past the pubs and they were killed by flying glass. And there are thousands of families like ours, and no family believes or everybody wants this bill to be scrapped. So what the government is saying is that this is to stop soldiers from being prosecuted. What a load of rubbish. We had a meeting with Brandon Lewis earlier this year when he was still Northern Ireland Secretary of State. And George Jones, who lost his father in the mulberry bush and had to identify him, put it to Brandon Lewis and said, how many soldiers is this meant to be protecting? He said, because I've done so, and he does do his research, George does, and he says, I can't find more than a handful. He said, I think there's 3. Well, when Brandon Lewis couldn't give him an answer, he said, I don't have those sorts of figures at hand. He's the Northern Ireland Secretary of State and he couldn't. And he's one of the ones who are railroading this in. He's one of the architects of this bill, allegedly. So let's think about this. 3,700 people were murdered. Allegedly, 70% of those were murdered by the Provisional IRA. So that equates to about 3,000. So this bill would give all of those terrorists, the paramilitaries on both sides, a green card to just continue on with their lives without ever facing any
I just wanted to
prosecution.
say, yes, indeed, Julie, that just for our viewers and listeners who maybe aren't as au fait as you and I would be with what happened in the past and what is happening now, that this legacy bill, which has been debated in the House of Lords at this present moment in time, seeks to give immunity from prosecution to people who come forward and say that they committed acts in the past. The idea being that if they come forward and say that they have done these sorts of things, that then that's closure. That wouldn't be closure for you, I presume. Not that they would come forward anyway, in my opinion. I'm sure in your opinion too.
Hypothetically speaking, let's say that they did come forward. They would never tell the truth. Who in their right mind would admit openly, whether they were going to get immunity or not, that they had murdered 21 people or they had murdered 29 or 31 because there was a lady who was pregnant in Omar. And then you've got soldiers' families who's lost loved ones. They also want justice as well. You've got the Scottish 3 soldiers who were lured to their deaths. Then you've also got the likes of Cathy McIlvenny, whose sister was raped multiple times, and she was so badly beaten and left in a river that she had to have a closed coffin. You've got Raymond McCord Jr., who was lured to his death. He'd just come home 25 years ago on the 9th of November. It would have been his birthday yesterday. I believe he would have been 47. God bless him. He was lured to his death by friends. They pulled a shotgun on him. It didn't fire, it locked. So they killed him with concrete blocks. He had to have a closed coffin. And this government wants to give these murderers an immunity.
Yeah.
If I may, can I just read out this quote?
If you can, quickly. Thank you, Julie.
Philip is Philip Campbell. He's the son of Joseph Campbell, who was an RUC officer who was killed by a state agent. And we've done an independent documentary that we're showing about this obscene bill. And this is his quote from Philip. He put, "I offer you one name, Joseph Schutz. An obscure name, but this is a man who at 101 years old was convicted in June this year in connection with the deaths at a Nazi concentration camp nearly 80 years ago. The prosecuting lawyer at close of trial said, for those people, the death of a relative in such a terrible way was a screaming injustice, and this trial gave them peace and helped to turn injustice into justice. There you have it in a nutshell. Exactly how justice should and can work.
So there's basically,
no
Julie, what
time
you're saying
limit,
is time limit,
no obstruction,
no time limit.
and no amnesty.
So no time limits on justice. And if you take away that hope for justice, you're taking away...
Well, there's no statute of limitations on
Correct.
murder in this country. And the Murder Act has been in place since 1750 in this country.
Yeah.
And they want to wipe away centuries old of legislation with this amnesty bill. It has got to be scrapped in its entirety.
Julie.
And I hope that you will support us in combating this and stopping this in the House of Lords now with your new peerage.
Thank you so much, Julie,
Thank you.
and thank you for coming down today. Well, I'm sure you'll agree that was a pretty powerful interview, and I'm delighted Julie could come and speak to us today. Coming up, I'll be speaking to GB News' London reporter Alice Porter about the upcoming nurses' strike. But before that, let's take a look at the weather.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Friday and Sunday night from 9, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
We're on the same page again. There's something weird happening.
Let Ian finish. Don't be such a cranky.
That mini budget was the tip of the iceberg.
And on Saturday, my show just got bigger. From 8, it's Mark Dolan's Saturday Night In.
You can't govern a country if you can't speak.
Stop talking.
My God, we reached the end. I've never been early in my life. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
And it's about standards and public life. No, I'll tell you what's hypocrisy, Narendra.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin.
We believe in the UK.
No bias, no censorship.
It just doesn't make sense to me. He wasn't doing his job as Chancellor.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to the show. Now, nurses in England, Wales and Northern Ireland are to strike for 2 days next month in what is set to be their biggest walkout in NHS history. They'll strike before Christmas on the 15th and 20th of December. The Royal College of Nursing Union, the RCN, said it has been given no choice after ministers would not reopen talks, but the government say that the 17.6% pay rise is unaffordable. Nurses will still provide emergency care during the strikes, but routine services will be hit. Well, joining me now is Alice Porter, who's outside the Royal College of Nurses in central London. Alice, good to see you. Obviously, this is very disappointing and will cause a lot of concern that we're going to have 2 days of strikes before Christmas.
Yes, absolutely, and it's certainly not a good look for the government because the Royal College of Nursing are saying that they're doing this industrial action because the government didn't even sit down to the table and negotiate with them. That's what they're claiming. That's why they are taking this industrial action on the 15th and 20th of December, which, as you were saying, they're just before Christmas, which is really a difficult time for the NHS with obviously severe waiting list issues, an enormous backlog. We already have issues with winter pressure there. So the timing of this is, of course, really significant. And, of course, we still have yet to get clarity on which aspects of the NHS will be hit. The good news is that those who need emergency care, those areas will be staffed, but we still don't have clarification yet about what constitutes emergency and non-emergency. We're expecting more details of which aspects of the NHS will be hit within the next week or so. There's still negotiations going on in Scotland, but as it stands, there will be strikes in England, Wales and Northern Ireland on the 15th and 20th December. And this is all because of a long-running dispute, as you were saying there, over pay. Nurses did receive a pay rise of about 4.75% in the summer, but RCN say that's not enough, and they have been putting forward a 19% pay rise. The government are saying that's far too much, that they wouldn't be able to afford it because it would end up being £10 billion a year. So that's very much their point of view, but the RCN are making an economic argument that actually, because there are so many shortages of nurses, in fact 25,000 nurses and midwives left the Nursing and Midwifery Council register last year, they're saying that actually the government is spending billions of pounds each year in plugging the workforce gaps, and therefore it would make a lot more sense to simply pay nurses more. Rishi Sunak gave his perspective on the strikes when he was questioned earlier today.
I come from an NHS family. My dad was an NHS GP, my mum was a pharmacist. The NHS is in my blood. I know how important it is. I grew up working with my mum in her pharmacy, and that's why we've prioritised the NHS. Now, we had to make some difficult decisions in last week's autumn statement, but we managed to prioritise investing more.
General practice is collapsing.
Well, we managed to invest billions of pounds extra in the NHS and in social care, because I really want to make sure that people get the care that they need. And I'm confident that because we're putting in the extra resources, we will now be able to find a way to improve the services, reduce wait times for people, not just at GP surgeries, but when they're waiting for their elective operations, where they're waiting for an ambulance or an A&E. Those are our priorities. We put the money in, and now we need to make sure that we get the reform and the improvements that we all need.
Nurses across this region planning a strike next month. Isn't that an indictment of the way you've treated them in previous years?
I have enormous respect and gratitude to our nurses, as everyone does, for the incredible job they do. And look, I know things are difficult right now for everyone because of what's happening with inflation. And that's why our plans that we outlined last week will get a grip of inflation and bring it down. That's really important. And in the meantime, what the unions are asking for, I think, is a 19% pay rise, and I think most people watching will recognise that that's obviously unaffordable, and that's why I'm pleased that the Health Secretary is sitting down, talking to the union, and hopefully we can find a way through this.
So Rishi Sunak talking there about people still talking, Alice, but I'm not sure that is the case, because the RCN's General Secretary, Pat Cullen, a woman who I know very well, she's from Northern Ireland, has said that ministers have chosen strike action because they aren't speaking to them and they aren't prepared to talk about this pay rise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it's a good look for the government. And that's something that Labour were very much pushing back today and was saying how frustrating the situation is for so many people in that regard. But there will also be today strike action in the ballot that will be taking place today for Unison members. And next week there'll also be people balloting with Unite, which is the UK's largest health union. We've also got physiotherapists and midwives who will also be potentially balloting, as well as junior doctors next year. So I think these strikes by the nurses next month need to be looked in a much broader context of ongoing strikes by so many different areas of the NHS. And it's going to put the government in an incredibly difficult position, because whilst we do have a number of different strikes from other sectors, of course, ongoing disputes with the RMT union, the postal union, and so the problem is, though, it's a very emotive issue when it comes to the NHS. I mean, you can sort of see the placards now, and the public sympathy could end up being far more with the striking NHS workers. And so for the government to not even sit down to the table puts them in a very difficult position as we come with winter pressures just before Christmas.
Alice, thank you so much for joining us. That's Alice Porter, our reporter outside the RTN headquarters in London. Well, on Wednesday, the UK Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the Scottish Government does not have the right to hold a referendum on independence without the consent of the United Kingdom's government. In a blow to Nicola Sturgeon's independence hopes, the Scottish First Minister said it was a hard pill for any supporter of independence, and surely indeed for any support of democracy to swallow. Well, joining me now to discuss the landmark ruling is Conservative MSP Jamie Greenie. He's the Shadow Justice Secretary up in Edinburgh. So tell me, was this a surprise to you, Jamie? Because it wasn't really a surprise to me.
It was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, it's the court case that we'd all been waiting on for quite some time, and I don't think everyone was expecting it to be so unanimous and so clear and decisive. And that's exactly what it was. I do welcome the Supreme Court's judgment on this. I think any calls to undermine that judgment or any questions that have been raised about the nature of the judiciary, I think, are very unwelcome and unhelpful in this discussion. I think it's been a very clear and decisive decision. And I knew all along, I think most of my colleagues knew, that the Scottish Parliament simply didn't have the ability to legislate in this manner for the Constitution and the potential breakup of the United Kingdom. So it's a very welcome result from my point of view.
It is a very welcome result, and they said that it was outside the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament under the devolution settlement, and that's where it is. But of course, that'll not stop the First Minister or indeed supporters of independence continuing to push for a referendum, Jamie. So what happens next?
Well, I mean, Nicola Sturgeon hasn't stopped pushing for a referendum since the day she lost the last referendum. Yeah. And I don't think that will change anytime soon. The big problem we have here in Scotland is we have a very powerfully devolved parliament and a government that is in control of so many aspects of day-to-day lives of Scots. But we have a government which is obsessed solely on the issue of independence. And as a result of that, we're seeing public services failing right across the country on transport, justice, health, social care, local councils. I mean, it's a disgrace, actually. I mean, the government needs to get back to its day job and focus on the things that people really are interested in talking about right now. And it's not independence, I have to say. When I'm talking to my constituents, they are far more worried about the cost of living, far more worried about what both of their governments are going to do to support them, and how both of Scotland's governments are going to work together constructively and positively for a change. That's up to Nicola Sturgeon. We set the gauntlet there. If she wants to come and work with other political parties and a positive future for Scotland, we can do that together. But we're not going to do that if she's stoking up grievance and division in the country.
Yeah, and I mean, that famous £20 million that was set aside by the government to look at independence, I presume that that's still been set aside to look at independence at a time when public services, as they are right across the United Kingdom, are under a lot of pressure, Jamie.
It's a disgrace, actually, Arlene. And do you know what? I mean, I sit in the Justice Committee, and we heard evidence from the SNP Justice Secretary this week, who said that he can't afford to give our police officers basic equipment such as body-worn cameras cameras for their own protection and for the protection of the public. That would cost £25 million to give every single police officer a body-worn camera in Scotland. Yet they've got £20 million parked aside of taxpayers' money sitting in the account for this independence referendum. I think the Scottish taxpayer should be affronted by this waste of money. And what they want to see their government spend money on is good public services. Let's reinvest that money back into where it should be, back into people's pockets, back into providing good quality public services in Scotland, and not squirreling it away for a referendum in the hope that one day it might come around. I think the SNP must accept to park this issue aside. Let's move on. They need to govern for all of Scotland, not just for their pro-independence supporters.
And Jimmy, just finally, it doesn't appear to me that she is going to park it, because she's now talking about the next election being used as a referendum, if you like, on whether people want to have a referendum or not. I mean, living in Scotland in a cost of living crisis, one would have thought there would have been more things to talk about than another referendum.
Absolutely. I mean, this idea that we're going to use the general election as some sort of quasi-independence referendum is bonkers, I'm afraid to say. We elect individual members of Parliament on a first-past-the-post system, one that actually does the SNP rather well, as much as they like to complain about the electoral system. And I think people will judge that election based on the issues of the day. What government do they want? What local MPs do they want? What local issues do they want to campaign on? People vote for a wide variety of reasons in general elections, whether it's the individual, the party, or for other issues. You cannot simply take ownership of it and say, this election is all about my issue and my issue is about independence. Nicola Sturgeon is in cuckoo land if she thinks that the Scottish people will bow to that pressure. We will treat that election like any other general election, and she cannot hijack it for the purpose of her independence referendum. It's simply not possible.
Well, unfortunately, I've seen this sort of thing happen in Northern Ireland as well, Jamie, as you can imagine. So I wish you well, and thank you so much for coming on to discuss this today on The Briefing. Well, coming up, Christmas travel woes lie ahead after the RMT announced a fresh round of strikes, more strikes across December and January, which is set to bring further travel disruption. But before we talk about that, here's Rhiannon Jones with your news headlines.
Arlene, thank you. 2:33, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Health Secretary is refusing to back down over nurses' pay demands ahead of their first national strike in over a century. Steve Markley says he can't agree to what he describes as a massive 17.6% pay rise. Staff in England, Wales and Northern Ireland will walk out for 2 days on the 15th and 20th of December. The government says the bullying investigation involving Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab has been expanded. Downing Street confirmed a third formal complaint has now been included. Mr Raab has denied any wrongdoing, saying his behaviour and conduct is always professional. A former soldier has been convicted of killing a man more than 30 years ago at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland. 53-year-old David Jonathan Holden was found guilty of manslaughter of Aidan McAnesby in County Tyrone in 1988. Holden admitted firing the fatal shot but claimed it was an accident. He's expected to appeal the verdict. And Wales lost their World Cup tie against Iran this morning, leaving them bottom of Group B with a game to play. 2-0 the final score. Both goals conceded late in stoppage time after Wales were reduced to 10 men after their keeper was sent off. Tonight, it's England's turn against the USA. They're chasing 3 points to secure a place in the knockout stages. Best of luck to them. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. It's back to Arlene Foster in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Monday to Thursday, 10 till 12, on TV, on radio and online.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. Now, let's get the latest now on the conviction of military veteran David Holden, who has been found guilty of the manslaughter of Aidan McAnespie. Aidan McAnespie was shot in the back at an army checkpoint in Northern Ireland in 1988 in Ochnacloy. We're going to cross live now to Belfast and speak to GB News reporter Dougie Beattie. Dougie.
Well, hello, and yes, Judge Justice O'Hara said that he found Holden's evidence incoherent and inconsistent, and basically he did not believe him. This all centred around an incident in 1988 at Ochnacloy when Mr McAnespie was crossing through to go to a Gaelic football match. On the way through, a gun was discharged and killing Mr McAnespie. David Holden, then an 18-year-old guardsman, said that his hands were wet from cleaning duties and they slipped on the trigger. That the family have fought for 34 years to try and get to the bottom of what has happened, and today outside court this is what they had to say.
Welcome today's ruling from Justice O'Hara. It's a day of mixed emotions obviously for the family. We're thinking primarily of Aidan, we're thinking of Eilish, who for the first 20 years of the campaign led the charge, and probably at the cost of our own health. We think of Lizzie and we think of John today, people that are really affected by the shooting of Aidan McAnespie at Ochnacloy. Some people will wonder, why do families persist for 34 years following cases this old? Well, it's very clear, and John, Aidan's father, the day that the PPS announced that David Holden was going to be prosecuted, he said that the only demand that he has is that he hears the truth. Because as a family and local community from that area, we did not believe the version of events that David Holden or the British government put out at the time of Aidan's shooting.
Well, you can hear from that the family are very happy with the verdict. The soldier, of course, has to appear back here in January for sentencing, but this comes on the back of quite a few legacy cases that have come through. And of course, the IRA have those letters of comfort and Queen's pardons of mercy that actually the only ones that can be brought back to answer in the Troubles are British servicemen. And Paul Young of the Veterans Association spoke to us just shortly after outside the court.
Veterans, I can say, will be deeply disappointed by this verdict. I'm saddened by it, but it's not over for David yet, because his team are, as far as I'm aware, are going to appeal the decision, and I think eventually, if necessary, go to the Supreme Court.
Well, you can see from that they are going to appeal it. They're going to bring it to the Supreme Court, and this all comes along with what is going on in the House of Lords at the moment, with this legislation on legacy that is going through to stop any more soldiers being brought to courts to face what they call to be a witch hunt.
Thank you, Dougie. I mean, obviously, I was speaking to Julie Hambleton today, whose sister was killed in the IRA bomb in Birmingham in 1974, and she was saying how this legacy bill has to fundamentally be changed because of the very fact that her loved ones deserve justice and truth, just as the McAnespie family, we heard them talking about truth earlier on, say that they wanted to get to the truth. And that's the hub of this whole legacy debate, isn't it?
Well, it is, because it rewrites the narrative in Northern Ireland. Even yourself the other day, you had quite an embarrassing situation when someone came beside you chanting IRA support songs. And of course, that then plays in that a victim becomes victimised, and that has to stop, because the narrative is being rewritten all the time by cases such as this behind. It doesn't put the past to bed. In fact, if anything, it opens it up.
Dougie, thanks for joining us, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about this legacy bill in the weeks to come. Now we're going to move on to transport strikes, and a fresh round of rail strikes are set to take place in December and January, bringing yet more travel disruption to the UK. RMT Union Chief Mick Lynch met with the Transport Secretary Mark Harper to try to reach an end to industrial action yesterday. This morning, London Mayor Sadiq Khan has also announced that London's ultra-low emissions zone will be expanded right across London. And thirdly, in other transport news, the government could be set to relax airport security restrictions on liquids and laptops, with the potential introduction of new high-tech scanners in 2024. Well, joining me now to discuss all of those things is Simon Calder, the travel editor of The Independent. Let's start with the strikes, which are still with us.
Well, they are, and in fact, there will be an impact from this evening. Tomorrow, it's the turn of the drivers, the train drivers belonging to the ASLEF union. They are striking for 11 train operating companies, including some of the really big long-distance services. So that's Avanti West Coast, LNER, GWR, Great Western, Cross Country, East Midlands and Transpennine Express, as well as some regional operators. They include Chiltern, Greater Anglia and South Eastern and Northern. So massive disruption in certain areas, but actually in many other places there are going to be trains running pretty much as normal. Transport for Wales, ScotRail are not affected. Of course, Northern Ireland Railways have never been involved in any of these strikes ever, so things are going along perfectly normally there. And certainly in the London area, you've got Great Northern, Southern and Thameslink, as well as South Western Railways, all running services. So it will be possible to make a good number of trips tomorrow. But as you say, we've got then another 8 days of strikes coming up from the RMT in December and January.
It's the uncertainty around all of that. And then at the same time, we have Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, deciding that the whole of London's now going to fall into this ultra emissions zone.
Yes, and a lot of people would be saying, hang on, well, how can we possibly be expected to be better at getting around on in low emission ways, such as on the underground, on the trains, if we're always going to have strikes? We've got a number of strikes actually today on the underground. This involves staff working at particular stations. No trains cancelled as far as I know, but some of the stations may be keeping shorter hours. I mean, certainly the ultra-low emissions zone is generally thought of by, certainly by the environmental lobby as a start. They would want it to go much further. But of course, we then also heard that, guess what, electric vehicles are going to be taxed from a couple of years' time. Previously, the encouragement was buy yourself an electric car, you don't have to pay any tax. So, yes, it's getting tougher for the motorist, but it's also a very tough time for the passenger and the taxpayer, who is, of course, every time there's a strike, it costs whatever, 30, 40 million pounds. That's coming straight out of your pocket, I'm afraid.
Yeah, unfortunately is right. Simon, I'm afraid we don't have time to talk about my favourite subject, which is the bag that I'm carrying all the time.
Yes, nothing is changing
all right,
yet.
just quickly tell us then.
Okay, fine. Right, so we've been doing this for the last 16 years. By next Thursday, we were supposed to be finishing this all the way across the UK. That was what Boris Johnson promised. It never happened. Maybe in 2 years' time we will do. Meanwhile, Ireland is getting ahead of the game. Other countries are. But unfortunately, just stick to the rules until you hear something something different.
Keep carrying the plastic bag in
Yes,
your hand
exactly.
luggage. That's what I need to keep doing, and I think I'll have to keep doing it for quite a while. Thanks so much for joining me, Simon. It's always a delight to have you in the studio. Well, the UK manufacturing sector is struggling, with a new survey suggesting industrial output shrank for a fourth time this month. But some individual manufacturers have been forging ahead, with production sharply up. Teva is a new company based in Tilbury Docks in Essex that makes trucks. Teva trucks are special. They're combining battery power with eco-friendly hydrogen as a fuel source. And our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has this special report on the money.
Tilbury Docks on the Thames Estuary. A British manufacturing heartland, this Essex port's home to a new company on the cusp of a technological revolution. Teva's among the world's most innovative producers of electric vehicles, or EVs. But more than that, these battery-powered trucks also run on hydrogen. There are just a handful of publicly available hydrogen filling stations like this across the UK, compared to tens of thousands of sites where you can refuel your electric car. But that doesn't mean that important things aren't happening when it comes to the development of hydrogen-fueled vehicles. In this brand new factory, less than a year old, Teva builds trucks fueled by both batteries and hydrogen. Having already rolled out a 7.5-tonne model, a new 19-tonne truck's also in the works. Teva trucks use a modified version of the lithium-ion batteries found in regular electric vehicles, but their hydrogen fuel cells make them dual fuel. So Teva trucks have much more range than typical EVs, able to travel for hundreds of miles between charges, making carbon-free truck fleets commercially viable. Founder and CEO Asher Bennett is an evangelist for hydrogen-powered vehicles, a technology which he says is too often overlooked.
It has advantages. It has a lot of energy density, so you can hold a lot of energy in hydrogen. And when you want to propel trucks for longer distances, lithium-ion batteries, which is an amazing technology, and as you can see, we do have lithium-ion batteries in our trucks, has some limitations. And we use the hydrogen where it's best used, and that's to overcome the downsides of lithium-ion alone in trucks.
HGVs, or heavy goods vehicles, account for around a fifth of global carbon emissions. But Bennett says dual-fuel EV hydrogen trucks can help decarbonise the road haulage industry worldwide.
We believe in the basis of lithium-ion batteries. We build our own batteries, by the way, as a great solution to get going. But for the practicalities of a truck, most trucks, it's best to have dual energy, which is all zero emission, and that's where hydrogen and batteries work together very well. And that's using what the strength of hydrogen, because it has great energy density and it, only 10 minutes to refuel when we need it.
One of the best ways to obtain the hydrogen needed to power these trucks is to separate water, H2O, using a process called electrolysis, but that itself needs electricity. If the hydrogen for Teva's trucks is collected using electricity generated from coal or other fossil fuels, so-called brown hydrogen, that defeats the purpose. It's no surprise that Teva's chosen to make its dual-fuel hydrogen electric vehicle trucks here in Tilbury in Essex. This is a part of the UK with huge automotive heritage. Already some 300 staff work at Teva's Tilbury plant. Close to Ford's iconic Dagenham factory, cars have been made around here for decades, a tradition Teva wants to tap into as the market for hydrogen vehicles expands.
Well, this area is a real sweet spot for innovation, for growing businesses. We've got the heritage of the automotive industry from Dagenham, for example. We've got the finance capital of the world for clean finance over in London. We've got access to all the renewable resources over in the North Sea with wind. We've got a great culture and policy environment to develop clean tech here and to scale up these businesses.
By the end of 2023, Asher Bennett and his team hope this Tilbury plant will produce over 2,000 trucks a year, creating 1,000 skilled jobs. Teva's name derives from the Hebrew word for nature, a nod to the founder's Israeli heritage. But Bennett was always clear he should launch his business in Britain.
The UK is just an amazing place to do what we do. There's such a strong historical ecosystem of automotive development. So much great universities here that teach us many disciplines that we need to build such a complex piece of technology. Coming to the UK to fulfill the vision was, in retrospect, a great decision, as we've now seen, because we're able to get great talent in this country, and we're proudly British. You know, we're developing them here, we're testing them here, and we're building them.
From Tilbury to Europe and beyond, Teva's truck technology could well go global as the retreat from fossil fuels gathers pace.
There's a report there by Liam Halligan. Well, earlier this week, a report by Embrace examining stillbirths and deaths within 4 weeks of birth found that 1 in 5 NHS trusts had been rated red for infant mortality rates. Keely Leghorn lost her baby boy, who she named George, at 22 and a half weeks in March 2022. She has been campaigning with SNP MP Angela Crawley for the Miscarriage Leave Bill, which will have its second reading in the House of Commons next week. This bill is fighting for those parents affected by a miscarriage to get paid leave, something that will be welcomed by all of those who have gone through this tragic situation. Well, I'm very pleased to say I'm joined by Keely herself now. Keely, thank you for joining me. I mean, one of the issues, isn't this the case, that if you have a stillborn baby after 24 weeks, you can have 2 weeks of paid leave. But if it happens, sadly, before 24 weeks, there's no mandatory statutory leave that has to be paid for.
Yeah, that's correct, Arlene. At the moment, there's a real lacuna in the law, unfortunately. So if you lose a baby like I did, I lost George 10 days before the statutory time limit, then the law says that you go back to work the next day. So if you lose a baby at 23 weeks and 6 days, if you lose a baby at 22 weeks like I did, you have to go back to work. So despite the fact you go through exactly the same process in terms of a birth, in terms of placental delivery, you leave your baby, unfortunately, I'll say it in the harshest terms, at the mortuary, and then the law says you go back to work at the next day.
Yeah, and I was quite surprised when I looked at the figures that 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage. So this is very common, unfortunately, for a lot of women that they lose their babies before 24 weeks.
Yeah. It's happening every day, 1 in 4. And unfortunately, the statistics do speak for themselves. And we've come to a point where the law is so archaic in this area. Like, even before, like you say, you didn't know about the law until you looked it up. Until, unfortunately, it's happened to me with George, I didn't know that there was this statutory lacuna in the law, which means that we're not protected. But unfortunately, we're at this point where women and men, because we can't miss out men as well, Arlene, are having to go back to work the next day after having to go through the ordeal of having a baby. Not just the physical ordeal of having to give birth, but the mental anguish of having to give birth to a baby that unfortunately is born sleeping. There's no protection in place to help you plan the funeral, to help you deal with the emotion, with the counselling, with the grief. So that's why we're campaigning so hard. That's why I'm campaigning so hard with Angela Crawley MP to try and get the Miscarriage Leave Bill through Parliament next Friday.
Yes, so I was just going to say the bill is up next Friday for its second reading. And you must be very pleased that it has got to this stage, because it started out as a 10-minute rule bill.
It did, yeah. I'm overwhelmed that it's got to this stage, and just keeping fingers crossed that we can get enough MPs. At the moment, we've got about 50 MPs on board, cross-party MPs who are supporting the bill, and hopefully will support us next Friday, but there needs to be more. There's a current petition online, Arlene, which I'm urging everyone to sign, to try and get as much backing behind the bill as possible, because it's quite clear to everyone that there is this lacuna in the law that we need to fulfil.
Yeah. Well, Keely, I wish I had longer to speak with you today about all of this, but I think we've made all of the points that we need to make. And I know that you have a little photograph of George, and I just want to warn viewers, if they want to look away at this time, if it causes them distress. But it is a lovely little photograph, and I think we should show the little photograph of George's little hand with your finger. Obviously, that was a very difficult time for you, and for you to be expected to go back to work on the very next day would, I know you didn't, because you had an employer that was sympathetic to that, but I just wanted to show that because I think it was important to do that. Keely, thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you.
And
thank you.
All the best with your bill and with your MPs that are supporting you. Well, that was a pretty full programme. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. The show's back every Friday from 2 p.m. now. Of course, we've moved from 3 p.m. to 2 p.m. I hope you can join me every Friday. But up next, it's Patrick Christie's.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Still some showers around today, but for the vast majority it is a fine day. A break in between rain spells and with plenty of sunshine as well. Low pressure is still with us. We've still got this westerly breeze, but weather fronts have moved out of the way, and through the rest of Friday this bump in isobars, that means a ridge of high pressure, will come along from the west. Ahead of that, a few showers for northern and northwest Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland, Wales and the southwest. Those showers fewer and further between by the end of the afternoon. A better chance of some sunshine in between the showers, and for much of central and eastern UK, it's dry through the day with blue skies. 13 Celsius in the south, 11 in the north. Still a fairly brisk breeze, but not as windy as it has been at times through the week. Into the evening, with clear spells and winds falling light for a time, temperatures will drop away, especially across central and eastern parts of the country. But further west, the cloud builds during the early hours, the wind picks up. So it's a mild start in the west, 12, 13 Celsius first thing for some exposed western coasts. In the east, meanwhile, 3 or 4 degrees, with a bright start here, despite that chill. Into the late morning, it looks like spells of rain will push through Northern Ireland into Scotland, parts of Wales and the far southwest. The rain becoming heavier and more persistent through the afternoon, accompanied by a strong wind, gales around exposed coasts. But it's a mild direction, 13 Celsius or 14 in the west, 11 or 12 in the east, where it does stay dry across East Anglia and the southeast until after dark, I think, with some brightness, although the cloud will thicken. And then through the evening, it's wet for many. The rain, heavy and persistent across southwestern areas, could cause some issues, but it does eventually, through Sunday, clear eastwards, and next week will eventually end up being drier than this week.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
I think I've seen probably quite enough of Matt Hancock to last me a lifetime.
I'll also be getting to know you better, travelling to find out what you think about the politicians who are fighting for your vote.
They've got to get this country back on track.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. only on GB News, on TV, radio and online.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Good afternoon, wonderful people. You're with me, Patrick Christie's on GB News. You can't get rid of me, can you? This is the first week of my new Friday 3 till 6 slot, so 5 days a week, 3 till 6. What's not to love? We're going to Qatar. We're also going to try and solve the migrant